Okay, so welcome back, and this is the 55th class of, I feel like we're going on 100, but we're not going to get to 100. We have only one more chapter left in this article, and today we'll finish chapter 7. So last time, if you remember, we talked about the false messiahs in the history of the Jewish people. The first one was this man called Gaon, which means pride, who was in Egypt, and he calculated, or he and others there calculated, that the time for redemption had already arrived, and because of that, they left 30 years before Moses arrived on the scene. They met with utter disaster, and they were killed when they tried to come into the land of Israel from the side of the seashore, what's called the sea path, Derech Hayam, and they were killed by the Philistines in what is today Kiryat Gat. It's the area around Gat. The next very big false messiah was Bar Kokhba, who we talked about last time. And about him we also saw that the same issue appeared. It was pride in himself and trying to present himself as the Mashiach. And then we know that over the course of medieval Jewish history, there was also a number of attempts for people trying to claim that they were the Messiah. The most famous one is, of course, Shabtai Tzvi, who the Baal Shem Tov came to restore Judaism after, meaning that he caused such a destruction of faith that it required the Baal Shem Tov to come back and heal the people to the degree that they could begin to believe in the redemption again. It was such a cataclysmic event, the failure of Shabtai Tzvi. The theme that repeats again and again, as we said last week, is that we have a very strong belief in our heart that the redemption is about to come, and we are only looking for a simple sign to be able to make it happen. And these false messiahs, they lead to destruction, but more importantly, what they lead to is heart failure. They lead to us not being able to believe in our hearts anymore, and not to be able to believe that the redemption is actually possible. That's the repercussion is even worse many times than the failure itself. When we translate this into the realm of the individual, that's obviously what happens, that when we follow our hearts trying to achieve some goal and we fail, sometimes what's worse than the failure is the lack of faith that we then have in ourselves, and an inability, even though it's very necessary to try again. You have to find the strength to try again. You have to continue to believe in what your heart tells you is your passion, your goal in life. But like any failure that we might have to the same issue that we have with a false messiah, the failure leads to an utter lack of belief in ourselves and an inability to trust that we can actually fulfill what our mission in life is. So that's the between the false messiah and the lack of success, the failure that we undergo. What we want to get to the root of today is what is the reason for this? Why? We're going to look first of all at the false messiahs. What was wrong with come to the and there was a man who built his entire academic career around this idea. His name was Gershom Scholem, that Judaism is against Messianism, that Judaism does not really believe in redemption, that there's really no such thing. The redemption is just there, sort of like holding a carrot in front of a horse and prodding him along by pulling him forward, by showing him the carrot, but the carrot is never attainable. Gershom Scholem thought, mistakenly, completely mistakenly, that the response, the Hasidic response to Shabtai Tzvi was to, as he calls it, to exorcise, meaning to extricate, to take out the messianic tension out of Kabbalah, out of the inner teachings of the Torah. Now this is we have to take this statement apart on a few levels to really understand what he's trying to say. But as far as the individual is concerned, what this means, what this would translate into is, don't pursue or don't really think that what your heart wants to pursue is real. That's a mistake according to taking Gershom Scholem's thinking and applying it to the individual. It's a very we would call it romantic picture of life, where pursuing the heart's desire, innermost desire, is simply fluff. There's nothing real about it. And a rational person is a person who can control that tension in the heart and understand that it's only there to add some extra nourishment or extra spice to life, but is not to pursue the heart's inner desire. Now, I want to take a step back and again return to Sholem's statement, that he says that Chassidut, the Baal Shem Tov's innovation in Pnimius Torah, in the inner teachings of the Torah, was an attempt to neutralize the messianic yearning in the inner teachings of the Torah. Now, we have to take this apart piece by piece, because the first thing that he says, and it's not even so clear, is that the idea of redemption is an idea that comes from the inner teachings of the Torah. Right? How do we know that there's a redemption after the redemption or the return from the exile of Babylon? What proof do we have for this? When the Jewish people were in Egypt, they had prophecies, and upon all these prophecies that were given by Joseph and by Jacob, they knew that they would be redeemed at some point. How did they know this? Because they had prophecies. They had revelations that told them that they would eventually be redeemed. What about the Babylonian exile? So there were prophecies by Isaiah, by Jeremiah, by Ezekiel. They all gave prophecies that at the end of a certain amount of time, some of them even said it explicitly, 70 years, they would return to the land of Israel, and they would rebuild themselves in the land. The exile would be over, and they would be able to return. So about those, we had prophecies that the destruction of the second temple, basically scattered at first more. How do we know that this exile will also terminate. Where do we get the idea that this is not going to be our state forever? A state of exile. The answer is that it doesn't say it explicitly in any of the prophecies. Where do we get it from? We get it from the Talmud. And the Talmud comes and says, yes, there will be such a thing as a Messiah. In fact, when you read the prophecies about the destruction of the first temple and the redemption from there, you don't find any mention of a figure who will be the Messiah. You don't find a mention of a figure who will lead the people back to the land of Israel. There's no such mention. It's only about the final redemption, the one from the second temple, that the sages begin to talk about this figure of the Mashiach. And they give all kinds of signs. And then they found in the Parsha in Israel next week, Parsha Balak, and in Bilam's parables, they find allusions to it, Darach Kochav miYaakov, V'kam Shevet miYisrael. They find allusions. But in the end, the notion that there is such a thing as a redemption and a Mashiach comes from the inner teachings of the Torah, which were already being taught by the sages of the second temple. Meaning they already had this idea. They already had begun to reveal the existence of such a person and the existence of a redemption that would be dependent on such a person. Now, when Gershom came to neutralize the Messiah, he was basically saying, first of all, that indeed the whole concept of the inner teachings of the Torah, from the way that the sages, even in the Talmud, teach us the secrets, the inner meaning of, it's not a prophecy. It's very important. It's different than prophecy. It's not just based on how a prophet would see something in his imagination, and it would be an interpretation of what God was telling him. Here we're talking about verses and teachings learned by their methods, and their methods are intellectual methods. They're not prophetic. This means, as we said last time, that even though the yearning is felt in the heart, the actions and the way of that yearning have to be based on the intellect. Because that's how the inner teachings of the Torah work. Sorry, I didn't say that right. They're initial heart, but they are guided in the end by intellectual pursuit. They have to stand up to some intellectual scrutiny. You can't just do things based on how you feel. They have to also stand up to your rational mind. And there has to be some plan. Everything that we're saying now is a build-up towards chapter 8, where we're going to take everything that we learned and we're going to turn it into a process that every individual can go through in order to transform the yearning, the feeling, the belief, the faith in the heart into a plan of action that can be executed, that can be done, and that avoids the pitfalls, or at least helps the person get out of the pitfalls that are inevitable in any pursuit of one's mission in life. So, getting back to this, what happened to the false Mashiachs, to the false messiahs that were wrong? So we've already said part of it. Now today we'll focus on the second part. The first part is that they were prideful. And we've already said many times Actually, we talked more about this, that we call rectifying, that pride is every person. Pride in themselves. Pride has to be directed. It has a use. A person needs to use pride, but in the right way. What's the right way? The right way is to have pride in God. The right way is to have pride in the mitzvot, to have pride in being Jewish. That's not an individual pride. It's not having pride in myself. Rather, having pride in my communal belonging, where I stand with my community. And to have pride in the community is very different from having pride in myself as an individual. So that's the first thing, and that's pretty clear. There's nothing really new about this, and it's one is considered the progenitor of whoever the Messiah will be, because he had this down, and he understood that pride could only be in God and in the community, and that he himself had to be lowly in his own eyes. That when he looked at himself, he would see his shortcomings. He would see his mistakes. He would live with them his entire life, knowing that he always needed to repent for what was wrong, and he had no cause for being prideful or being higher or feeling hubris over any other individual. But the second part we started talking about last time was the trust. And trust is a big deal. Trust means that, or let's translate it into the other word we've been using, confidence. Confidence is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, meaning it can hurt you just as much as it can show the way. Confidence has to be directed fully as being confident in God and not being confident in myself. But, if you remember, a long time back, I think about 3-4 months ago, maybe even 5, we had a class about self-confidence. The true confidence in God leads to self-confidence. We also said that having faith in other individuals, having faith that every Jew has a divine soul, and having faith in the fact that they can serve God and fulfill their mission to the best of their ability, those two things, again, confidence in God and faith in other Jews, leads to self-confidence, to rectified self-confidence. It empowers the person. The focus, again, is not on myself. The focus is either on the fact that I completely, 100%, am confident that God can bring this about, this goal that I'm trying to pursue, and the other side, faith in other Jews, faith in other people. To truly believe, when you look at anybody else, that person can attain the very best fulfillment of their life's mission, and it's within their reach. And when you look at the Lubavitcher Rebbe as an example, you see that the way that he looked at people was he completely ignored, he was blind to their shortcomings, and absolutely focused on their abilities, on their divinely given abilities to succeed. Succeed in what way? To succeed in their pursuit of their life's mission. And whomever talked to him felt that was the main thing that the Rebbe gave them. He gave them confidence in themselves. He gave them the strength to believe in themselves that they too can lead a godly life. So these two things lead to confidence. On the other hand, exactly the opposite was somebody like Bar Kokhba, or Ben Koziva, as we said that the sages called him, because he was not true, or he wasn't trustful, as we call it, who doubted every single person that he saw. Meaning he came from a position of doubting. There was no real feeling that my purpose as the leader is to bring out the best in you. There was a feeling that I as a leader need to protect myself, to make sure that the people who are working with me are 100% entirely devoted. So a lot of his tactics actually remind us of Yakuza. If you know how the Japanese mafia works, it works in the same way. You have to prove your worthiness. And you prove your worthiness by being willing, for instance, to part with a finger or two or three. Depends what they want from you. And he used exactly the same tactics. If you wanted to join his army, you had to be willing to take a finger off. And that was proof, that was, as it were, the proof that you're the right person who can be here. So this is very interesting. Somebody who just joined, it's called 812629. I wonder if that's a phone number, or if that's gematria. Anyway, I'm not picking up the gematria right now, so it's probably a phone number in some way. Okay. Just one moment. Okay. Where does it start? Where does self-confidence begin to, call it, gnaw at the person? Where does over self-confidence hurt us? And here we're coming to something that we mentioned last time, that one of the meanings, or one of the reasons given by the sages to the fact that Bar Kokhba failed, and this is mentioned in passing regarding the first false Messiah, who we said his name was Gaon, who tried to lead the Ephraimites out of the Egyptian exile. Bar Kokhba tried to create an independent economy. How do you create an independent economy? The first thing you have to do, you have to have this, is you have to coin your own coins. You have to make your own currency. And this was how, in ancient times and how today, a king makes his kingship known. He takes coins, usually they would take coins that had already been minted, and they would boil them down back into silver or gold or whatever it was, and they would mint them again. They would stamp them with the new king's profile, right? The picture. Sometimes it was a picture of the king himself. This was very common by non-Jews. And by Jews, it was usually some verse, some word, some symbol. Usually they didn't use an actual picture of a person because of the prohibition to make what's called a masecha, to make a mask. A mask is really a embossed figure on some piece of metal. He tried to do this, and he created his own currency, and by making his own currency, he, of course, back then, since the currency was silver itself, there was real value to the coins. It's not like today where it's a nominal value. So the currency, the power of the currency was more that there were more and more coins bearing his symbol, and not that those were the coins being used, as opposed to Roman coins or Greek coins or whatever else was running around in the world at the time. That showed his power. But he failed. And the failure of his economy, of his independent economy, is cited as one of the reasons, or maybe the reason, why his entire rebellion against the Romans failed in the long run. Even though there was a time that he controlled a great deal of the land of Israel. But in the end, he utterly failed. Why is this interesting to us? Because it teaches us what the main problem with self-confidence is. Self-confidence has a way, misplaced self-confidence, which doesn't derive from the two things we talked about before, confidence in God and faith in other Jews. Self-confidence hits and gnaws at the sphere of acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is hod. Hod is related to charisma. It's one of the ways that we translate this word. That when a person has hod, he really has a charisma about him. He really has a sense of self-worth, you could call it. What is charisma? Charisma is basically, if you had to define it, it's a hard, tough word to define because we're talking about a feeling that we have for other people. That person is charismatic. What we mean to say is he's self-contained. He's not dependent on anyone else. He doesn't seem to need anyone else in order to do what he does. He's confident about himself. And we could say that this is the difference between active confidence and passive confidence. Active confidence is how you do things. It's victory. It's what we call just confidence. But it's confidence in an act when I'm doing something. Passive confidence means I'm not doing anything. Because as we said, passive confidence means I know what needs to be done, but I, God, can't do it. So I have trust in you, I have confidence in you that you will take care of this. That's what passive confidence is. That's what Hod is about. So people can't see who I'm trusting. They can't see whether I'm trusting God or whether I'm trusting myself. What do you see with passive confidence? You see a person who's very calm, charismatic in the sense that he doesn't feel pressured to gain the support or help from other places. Because that's exactly what passive confidence is. That there's nothing that can be done. Now the question is, how do I deal with that? Do I continue to be confident? Or do I lose it because I can't do anything? Am I a control freak or not? A person who's about controlling his outcome finds it nearly impossible to have passive confidence. Because passive confidence is the opposite of controlling the situation. It's about having confidence that the situation will resolve the way I want it to resolve, but without my intervention because I can't intervene. I don't have the ability. I don't have the tools. I don't have the knowledge, whatever it is, to intervene and shift the situation in the direction that I want. So what am I confident? Why am I confident? Because I trust that Hashem will do it. But what does a person like this look like? He looks charismatic. He looks like he's not dependent on anything because you can't tell inside that he's depending on God. That doesn't show on the face. What you see on the face, what you see in the way that he carries himself, is that he's confident and seems to not need and not be dependent on anything. That's hod. That's acknowledgement. If the acknowledgement is thanksgiving and acknowledgement of God's ability to bring about the desired result, that's positive. But if independence is one way it feels, that's the failure of passive, your trust in yourself. Meaning that it's like miraculously, it's like saying, my mazel, I'm so can't come out bad. I have such a good track record that this is going to have to work. That's the failure of passive confidence. That even though I don't have the tools, I don't have the ability to make self-confidence, not in God but in myself, that I'm calm. And that's what charisma looks like. I don't need you. When you translate that into a bigger picture, that is what independent economics look like. God created the world in such a way that the nature of the world is such that it really means that I acknowledge that in order for so-and-so to happen, help people. Or I need the help, participation, and support of God. Acknowledgement is meant to put me in a place where my charisma comes from the fact, acknowledgement, in passive confidence. The understanding that as many talents as I have, as many abilities as I have, in the end, my success depends on working with others. That's why we've mentioned this a number of times, that the holy name that's related to Netzach and Hod, Tzevakot, Tzvaot as we say, in Atbash means that you exchange letters. It's a letter transformation. So Tzadik becomes Hey, Bet becomes Shin. You go in reverse order. So the Aleph becomes the Taf, the Bet becomes the Shin, Gimel becomes the Reish, Dalet becomes the Kuf, and so on. So if I take Tzvaot, which is Tzadik, Bet, Aleph, Vav, Taf, and I transform it using Atbash, the word that I get is Hey, Shin, Taf, Pei, Aleph. Hey, Shin, Taf, Pei, Aleph. It's derived from the name Tzvakot, which is the name of victory and acknowledgement, active and passive confidence. But what does this name mean? Out, and you'll see that it means cooperation, shutafut, the ability to cooperate with others. What this means is that these false messiahs became false messiahs because they were not willing, for whatever reason, the reason being, of course, being overly self-confident in themselves, they weren't willing to cooperate with others. The lack of cooperation with others is really a statement that I have it all. I don't need anything from anybody else. That's pride. That's exactly what pride is. And the feeling of overconfidence in the self can be translated, for instance, into this dream of economic independence. So for the Jewish people, it's not a negative thing to be economically independent. But the truth is that you can't be completely self-sufficient. the downfall of every economy, the downfall of every, call it microeconomy, like in a family or an individual, is the feeling that I'll do this by myself. I was talking to a real estate investor last week. He's a guy who does a lot of real estate developments and things in Israel. And he gave me a parable that I'm not a very big businessman, so I don't know much of these things. But he gave me a parable that really, it was an example that sometimes you can give a parable and you can really change the way that a person looks at something. So I was brought up by my father, blessed memory, that I should never have debt. It's usr. It's mamash and isr d'oraisa. It's prohibited from the Torah to have debt, which is true to some degree. And therefore, I was always living with the belongings that I had, with the money that I had. So I was talking to this real estate investor, and he said, I understand the reluctance to take debt, but let me give you an example. Sometimes you need a crane to lift something heavy. You can't lift it by yourself. So the deals that I do, he says, I have to take debt. Because for me, taking a loan from a bank is a crane. I don't see it as a goal in and of itself. I'm not looking for the money to spend. The money for me is a crane to lift something heavier that I can't do with my own means. And with that one parable, he shifted my whole thinking about this. Not that I'm about to take a loan or something, but I began to taking money, but in the same way that you pay a crane operator to come and lift something heavy. Let's say you have a refrigerator that you want to bring to the 4th floor, and it doesn't fit in through a window, which is very common in old buildings in Israel. So you get the crane. You don't buy the crane. You're not interested in the crane for itself. You pay the crane whatever it costs that refrigerator up to your floor and into your apartment. The same thing is with loans that are meant to be repaid. You give the crane back, you give the loan back. You have that money at your disposal. You're able to lift something much heavier than what you could do by yourself. So that's an example of cooperation. And you can only cooperate in this way if you have the secret of true confidence in God and not to be independent, trying to be overly independent and dependent only on yourself. To truly have trust in God goes hand in hand with having faith in other people. For instance, the crane operator who comes to me, or the bank that's loaning the money, has faith, as it were. I don't know how much faith they have, because they make you sign your shirt and your right hand off in case you don't repay it. But in principle, they could lose it. And they don't know how much they're going to be able to get back from you in the end. So they have faith in the crane operator that he's not going to drop your refrigerator. He has to have faith that you're going to pay him at the end of the job. Connection between people, interdependence, acknowledgement that we need each other is based on having faith in one another. And when you can't have faith in somebody, then you also can't lift heavy loads. You can't do great things. You're limited to what you can lift by yourself. So as much as Bar Kochba could have been the beginning of the redemption, as Rabbi Akiva thought, in practice he wasn't able to do it because he was bogged down by his own independence. He was bogged down by his feeling that I have to finish it all by myself. It has to all, in the end, go under my name because I don't have faith in anybody else. So this really translates into freeing the heart. I can only really come to a state of pursuing my life's mission if I can develop acknowledgement, passive confidence, and be able to include and admit my interdependence with other people, operate with other people. And in order to do that at the best level, I have to have a sense that other people are also guided by their divine soul, that they also want what's good. If I don't have that, like Bar Kochva demonstrated very clearly, he didn't have faith in the soldiers. They had to prove themselves to him. If I don't have that faith, because in the end I dry up, because there's only so much that every individual can do by themselves, is that his name, Koziva, means a dried up river. A river that when there's no rain, it can't continue to flow. It dries up. It becomes a dry riverbed. We also, if we don't have the ability to use confidence in God and faith in others, we become like a false Messiah also. And the things that we've tried to do, they fail, and we stop believing in ourselves. Just like the repercussions of these false messiahs was a cataclysm and an inability to continue to believe in the redemption, to continue to believe in what they symbolized. There has to be a way for a person to get over these failures. And the way that you get over these failures is by preparing the ground, knowing that my confidence really is in God. And my passive confidence is in other people. I don't have to have active confidence in other people, but I have to have at least passive confidence. I have to at least believe confidently that they will do good on what they've said. They will stand up to their commitments. And that they're not just here to hurt me. To restore that faith in other people, that's the real goal of confidence in God. If I believe that God is running the world, and then in the end, what other people have in mind really is the fulfillment of their divine mission, so that I can have confidence and trust them that we can do something together, that we can actually create something, we can lift something much heavier than what I've been used to lifting by myself. So this is the final stage of learning what it means that building our commitment to our own fulfillment requires that we don't become our own false messiah. Requires that we don't start trusting ourselves independently, thinking that we can operate alone without acknowledging the need to include others in what we're doing. And one of the most beautiful things, I think, that came out of the Rebbe's leadership was how much he talked about the fact that he couldn't do things by himself. He kept stressing this the whole time until eventually, on the famous Sikha from the 28th of Nisan, he began to talk about the fact that I've done all that I can, now I'm giving you the responsibility. Meaning, it's not just that we're going to do this together, but I'm taking the responsibility off of myself and handing it to you, which is even more a state of dependence on others than was possible by any of the false messiahs. A real Mashiach, a real pursuit of my goals in life, my self-fulfillment, has to include a picture of doing this with everybody. That my benefit is dependent on my willingness to cooperate with others. That it's not about me per se, it's about us. So again, this is not preaching. What we are talking about is stressing faith in other people. Understanding that by being willing to cooperate with others, I'm not losing anything. Even though it may seem to me that at some level now things are out of my hands. But the Rebbe stressed that even if they are out of your hands, that is part of the redemptive act. The willingness to be dependent on others at some level. Again, it's not taking the responsibility off of yourself entirely, but it does mean that you can't do it by yourself. Next week, God willing, we'll start chapter 8. And in chapter 8, we're going to take... Yes, Javi, hold on, let me turn you on. What did you call yourself? Yehudis. God only knows why.
Yeah, well, can I talk?
Yeah.
It's Yehudis Hobby. That, my name is Yehudi. Yehudis Hava. So
okay.
I just tried that out. Anyway, I just want to tell everybody that Rav Effie has canceled because he doesn't feel well. That's all.
Everybody should feel well. And everybody's voice should come back.
Okay.
I can only say thank you to Hashem that my voice is improving. I don't think I coughed even half the time. Maybe a little bit, something in the middle. Mamish Chazdei Hashem, loving kindness of Hashem. And next week, God willing, we'll continue with chapter 8. Chapter 8 has already been translated, so I will put it on the Torah Nefesh group. Hopefully I'll remember today even, so you can print it out and we can read from the translation. I'm almost sure I translated all of it already. And that'll bring everything we've done together into how to actually go through a 4-stage process that is necessary for defining and executing our goals, okay, and seeing them fulfilled. So that'll begin, God willing, next week. Turning on the cameras, so I actually got to see people. That was a big deal. Makes it a lot easier, I have to tell you. Okay, bye-bye.